I never thought I'd be the guy pouring his heart out on Reddit, bearing it all to a bunch of strangers. Yet here I am. Life has a twisted way of pushing you into situations you'd never imagined. My name's David, and for the past 10 years, I've been married to Emily. We have two beautiful daughters, and if you look from the outside, you'd think everything was picture perfect. The house, the family, the life, it all seemed like a dream. But lately, things have shifted, and not in a good way. Emily started pulling away, acting distant, cold, even. Not just the kind of cold from a bad day, but the kind that makes you feel like something's deeply wrong, even if you can't pinpoint exactly what. I figured it was probably work stress. She's got a high-powered job at some marketing firm. Meanwhile, I gave up my own career a few years back to stay home with the kids. Yeah, go ahead and laugh, the guy who traded in a desk job for diaper duty. But honestly, I didn't mind. I love being there for my daughters, and I thought Emily and I were on the same page. I thought we were a team. Man, was I ever wrong. It all started one morning when she left her phone on the kitchen counter. Lately, she'd been more secretive with it, turning the screen away when I walked by, but I didn't push it. Stupid of me, really. But that day, she forgot it, and something deep down, call it gut instinct, told me to take a look. So I did, and there it was, staring back at me like a neon sign. Messages from a guy named Alex. These weren't your run-of-the-mill work texts either. They were dripping with emotions that made me sick to my stomach. Last night was amazing. One said, complete with heart emojis for good measure. Another, can't wait until we're together again. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I just stood there, looking at the screen, watching my entire world start to fall apart. But I didn't confront her. Not right away. That would have been too easy for her, a get-out-of-jail-free card. So I sat on it, let it simmer, and decided I needed to dig deeper. Was this Alex guy the only one? Was this just some fling? Or was there more to it? And the big question, what was she planning? I hired a private investigator, a guy who didn't ask too many questions. I gave him Emily's schedule and told him everything I knew. Then I waited. The next few weeks felt like a lifetime. Every time Emily smiled at me or kissed our daughters goodnight, I wondered just how far her betrayal went. How long had she been pulling the wool over my eyes? And why the hell was I the last one to see it? Turns out, she'd been screwing Alex for months. The investigator brought me the proof. Photos of her and Alex sneaking into hotels, having dinners, acting like a couple of love-struck teenagers. It wasn't just physical either. Their texts were full of future plans, talking about moving to Europe together, taking my kids, and leaving me behind like I didn't even matter. That's when the rage kicked in. It was bad enough she was cheating, but planning to take my girls away? That was a line I wasn't going to let her cross. But I wasn't about to blow up on her. Not yet. No, that's what she'd expect. So I played dumb. I pretended everything was fine. Played the doting husband, while she carried on with her affair. Hell, I even ramped up my affection just to keep her from suspecting a thing. I needed time to set my trap. Here's where it got interesting. Turns out Emily wasn't just cheating with Alex. No, that'd be too simple for her. She had another guy, Ryan, another one of her colleagues. She was playing him for emotional support while using Alex for, well, other things. One guy wasn't enough for her. She had to have two. So, I started pulling the strings behind the scenes. I knew Alex had a reputation for being a bit of a player. And Emily? Well, she was always insecure about whether or not he was faithful. So I planted the seed, dropped a few hints here and there, whispered in the right ears. I even sent Emily a few anonymous messages, suggesting that maybe Alex wasn't as loyal as she thought. It worked. She started getting paranoid, always checking her phone, frustrated with Alex. Meanwhile, I played the role of the perfect husband, smiling, being there for the kids, acting like everything was just fine. All the while, I was biding my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. It didn't take long before I found the perfect way to turn Ryan against Alex. A few carefully planted texts, a little jealousy stirred up, and soon both of those idiots were doubting Emily's loyalty. I was setting the stage for her whole world to collapse, and she had no clue. But I had to be patient. I couldn't rush it. Every piece of evidence had to be solid, airtight. When I finally made my move, I wanted it to be the kind of thing you don't come back from. So I kept up the act, the oblivious husband, smiling through the lies while Emily's tangled web slowly unraveled. The tension in the house grew thick. She must have felt it too, but she couldn't figure out what was wrong. I watched her start to question herself, wondering if she was being too obvious, if I had caught on. But I kept my cool. It was almost amusing in a twisted way, knowing more about her life than she did. The private investigator kept feeding me dirt, photos, texts, even audio recordings. Some of the things she said about me to Alex, if there'd been any love left in my heart for her, it would have died right then. She talked about me like I was nothing more than a boring, useless man she couldn't wait to ditch, complaining that I had lost my ambition, that I wasn't the man she married. All while I was home, raising our daughters, keeping everything running so she could pursue her career. To her, though, I was just nothing. It wasn't just her affair with Alex that drove me up the wall. Emily started pulling away even more, barely spending any time at home. And the worst part? The girls noticed. Our oldest, Ella, started asking me why Mommy wasn't around as much anymore. That cut deeper than anything else. It's one thing to screw me over, but when her selfishness started hurting the kids, that's when I knew I couldn't let this drag on. I had to move fast, especially with her plotting to take them halfway around the world with that slime ball. Everything came to a head one night after the girls were asleep. Emily strolled in late again, giving me the same tired excuses: work, client dinners, all the usual BS. I played my part, asking her how her night was, smiling like an idiot. But inside, I was boiling. I'd had it. I couldn't resist jabbing at her, just to see her squirm a little. "Do you ever feel bad about leaving the girls so much?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. For a second, her eyes widened, like I hit a nerve. But then she brushed it off like always. "Oh, David, come on. I'm doing all this for us, for the family. You know how demanding my job is." "Yeah, sure," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "But it's starting to feel like you're not just working late anymore. Feels like you don't even want to be here." Her head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. "What are you getting at?" I shrugged, acting indifferent. "I don't know. Just seems like we're drifting apart, don't you think?" She looked away, clearly rattled. Good. I wanted her to feel the heat, but I wasn't ready to lay my cards on the table yet. Not until I had everything in place. "Maybe we should talk," I suggested, keeping my voice light. Figure out where we're heading. I don't want us to lose each other." That hit her harder than I expected. She hesitated, probably trying to figure out if I knew anything. After an uncomfortable pause, she forced a smile. "Yeah, maybe we should." It was so fake, so rehearsed that I nearly laughed. She had no idea I was already miles ahead of her. I decided to let it drop for the night. I wasn't ready to make my move just yet. I needed more leverage. Because I wasn't just going after Emily. I was going to make sure her precious Alex and Ryan went down in flames with her. The next day, I set my plan into motion. I had more than enough dirt to ruin Emily's life, but that wasn't satisfying enough. I wanted her to taste the same betrayal and humiliation she'd fed me for weeks. So, I reached out to a mutual acquaintance of Alex, someone who had a knack for spreading gossip. I made sure this person accidentally overheard a juicy little tidbit about Alex seeing someone else on the side. It didn't take long for that little rumor to get back to Emily. Within days, she was on edge, glued to her phone, grilling Alex about where he was and who he was with. It was sweet revenge, watching her paranoia creep in. Meanwhile, I was working on Ryan too, dropping subtle hints that Emily might be involved with another guy. Ryan was already insecure, so it didn't take much to get him doubting her. Soon enough, both of them were suspicious, and her whole little house of cards was starting to collapse. But just when I was getting ready to pull the trigger, I discovered something that nearly threw me off my game. Emily had beaten me to it. She'd already hired a divorce lawyer. That's when I realized just how far ahead she thought she was. She wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to wipe me out. File first, paint me as the deadbeat husband, and walk away with full custody of the girls. She wanted to take everything, the house, the savings, the kids, and leave me with nothing. She didn't just want to leave. She wanted to destroy me. I knew I had to act fast. If she filed first, I'd be fighting an uphill battle in court, and with how things go, the system usually leans toward the mother in custody fights. With her lawyer already in the mix, it could have gotten real ugly real fast. So, I called my lawyer, laid it all out for him. Every disgusting detail, every bit of evidence I'd gathered on her affairs. I told him we had to move, and we had to move now. We filed for divorce the next morning. The look on Emily's face when she got served? Worth every second of planning. She came home that night absolutely livid, practically shaking with rage. As soon as the girls were in bed, she came at me, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What the hell, David? You filed for divorce." I leaned back, as calm as could be. "Yeah, I figured it was time, don't you?" Her eyes blazed with fury, but she tried to keep her composure. "You're making a big mistake. I've already talked to a lawyer. You're not going to win this." I stood up, walked over to her, and looked her dead in the eye. "Emily, you don't even know what game we're playing yet." She blinked, confused for just a moment, and that's when I knew I had her. She had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but she was about to find out. Everything was about to blow up in her face, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The way Emily's face froze when I said those words, that blank, confused look, was everything I'd been waiting for. She didn't have a clue just how deep she was in. No idea that I was holding all the cards. For a second, I thought she might crack, confess it all. But who was I kidding? Emily was never the type to back down without a fight. "What the hell are you talking about, David?" She spat, her voice climbing in volume. "You think you could just file for divorce and take everything? You're completely out of your mind." I crossed my arms, staying outwardly calm, even though adrenaline was making my heart race. "I know everything, Emily. I've got proof. I've got witnesses. You've been screwing Alex and Ryan. Don't even try to deny it." Her face twitched, just a flash of shock, before she quickly masked it with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, my expression cold. "You want to see for yourself? I've got pictures, text messages, even video. You really thought I was that blind? That I wouldn't figure it out?" She went rigid, her brain clearly working overtime to find an escape route. But she knew, just like I did, there wasn't one. Not anymore. Her anger flared, but this time it was desperate. "You think this is all my fault? You haven't cared about me or our marriage in years, David. You've been so wrapped up in playing house with the kids that you stopped giving a damn about us. You think I wanted this?" I let out a dark, humorless laugh. "Oh, that's convenient. So what, Emily? You had no choice but to run into the arms of two other guys because I wasn't stroking your ego anymore? Please. I've been here, holding this family together while you've been out doing whatever you felt like. Don't try and flip this on me." "You don't get it," she snapped, her voice cracking, her frustration breaking through. "You never understood. I didn't ask to be stuck in this life. This boring, dead-end life with a man who's just coasting by." I could feel the anger building in me, but I wasn't about to let her make this about herself. "Stuck? That's rich. You've been planning this, haven't you? Running off to Europe with Alex, taking the kids, leaving me behind. Like I'm nothing." Her face drained of color, and I knew I'd hit the mark. She hadn't expected me to know that much. She was realizing just how deep I was into her game. For a second, it looked like she might actually falter. But she wasn't done yet. "You think you're going to win this, David? You think you'll get custody?" The court sighed with the mother. "I've already got a lawyer, and they're ready to destroy you in court. You'll be left with nothing." I stepped forward, lowering my voice. "You've forgotten something, Emily. You're not the only one with something to lose." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I unlocked my phone and turned the screen to face her. It was a text thread between Alex and Ryan, two men who had no idea they were both being played. And I had made sure they'd found out about each other. "Your little boyfriends aren't happy, Emily," I said, my voice calm. "Turns out when you string two guys along, they don't take it well. They're more than willing to testify about your affairs. Imagine that in court. For the first time, real fear crept into her face. This wasn't anger, frustration, or guilt. This was panic. You wouldn't, she whispered, her voice shaking. I shrugged. Why wouldn't I? You think I care anymore? I'm done, Emily. I've got nothing to lose now. But you? You've got everything to lose. Your job, your reputation, the kids, all of it. I watched her breathing speed up as the reality sank in. David, please, we don't have to do this. I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. Oh, we do. She took a step closer, softening her voice, trying to switch tactics. Think about the girls, David. Do you really want them to go through this? Honesty divorce? You want them growing up in a war zone between their parents? That was a low blow. I won't lie. She hit a nerve. The girls didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to see their parents tear each other apart like this. But I couldn't let her walk away, not after everything she'd done. Not after she tried to rip this family apart. I'm doing this for them, I said quietly. I'm not letting you take them away from me. I'm not letting you run off and pretend like none of this happened. Her eyes welled up with tears, but I wasn't buying it. She was trapped, and she knew it. I had all the leverage I needed. If she pushed me, I was ready to bring the whole thing crashing down. She took a shaky breath, barely whispering now. Fine. What do you want? Finally, the moment I'd been waiting for. She was ready to negotiate, to face the fact that she wasn't walking out of this unscathed. I want full custody of the kids, I said, my voice firm. I want the house, and I want you to walk away without trying to bleed me dry. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't let her get a word in. Don't even think about fighting me on this, Emily. You know I'll drag Alex and Ryan into court if I have to. They'll tear you apart to save themselves, and you know it. This isn't a fight you can win. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw it defeat. She knew I wasn't bluffing. This was over, and she had lost. Emily clenched her jaw, her eyes burning with anger and frustration. I could see the battle raging inside her. Wanted to fight me tooth and nail, but she knew the truth. This time, she couldn't win. Fine, she muttered, her voice dripping with bitterness. I'll sign the papers. But I wasn't letting her off that easily. And one more thing, you're going to tell the girls the truth. You'll explain to them why this is happening. They deserve to know the real reason their family's falling apart. Her glare could have burned through steel, but I didn't flinch. After everything she'd put us through, this was the least she owed our daughters. Fine, she snapped, venom in her voice. But don't think this is over, David. You might have won this round, but we'll see how things play out in court. I didn't bother responding. I didn't need to. I knew I already had her cornered. She could hurl all the threats she wanted, but the upper hand was mine now. As she stormed out of the room, a strange sense of calm washed over me. Sure, this fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I was in control for the first time in months. I'd played the long game, and it was finally paying off. I knew Emily wouldn't just roll over and accept defeat, though. Even with her agreeing to sign the papers, she was still plotting something. And, just as I expected, the very next day she was back in her lawyer's office. How did I know? My private investigator was still working for me, keeping tabs on her every move. He was feeding me a steady stream of intel, and I was ready to use every bit of it. The day after our showdown in the kitchen, my lawyer called. Emily's lawyer had reached out. She wasn't going down without a fight. She was gearing up for an all-out battle over custody, planning to use the courts to paint me as an incompetent, lazy stay-at-home dad. She thought she could convince them I couldn't provide for the girls, that I was some washed-up failure who didn't deserve them. Classic Emily. Always scheming, always twisting things to suit her. But what she didn't know was just how deep I dug into her lies. My investigator had uncovered more than just her affairs with Alex and Ryan. Turns out, Emily had a few other flings going on too. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was a serial cheater. I sat down with my lawyer and laid it all out. Every incriminating detail. The text, the pictures, the videos, the recordings. If she wanted to go to war, I was ready to scorch the earth. The days dragged on, and the tension in the house was unbearable. Emily avoided me like the plague, barely making eye contact, but when she did, the hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. She was planning something, I could feel it, and then, out of nowhere, she dropped the bomb. "I'm moving out," she said one morning, casually, while I was making breakfast for the girls. Her tone was flat, like she was telling me she was going to run errands. I found an apartment. I looked up from the stove, doing my best to stay calm. "That was fast." She shrugged, still not meeting my gaze. "Alex is helping me. We're moving in together." There it was. No more pretense, no more lies. She was all in with Alex, no shame, no regret. Just like that, she was ready to walk out on the life we'd built and abandon our daughters as if they were an afterthought. "What about the girls?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the anger boiling inside me. "Are you planning on taking them with you?" Emily sighed, finally turning to face me. "We'll figure that out in court, David. But let's be real. You can't give them what I can. You don't have a job, no income. How are you going to provide for them?" I clenched my jaw, holding back my temper. She was trying to provoke me, trying to make me lash out, but I wasn't going to fall for it. I had to stay focused, play the long game. "They're my daughters, Emily," I said, my voice cold. "I've been the one raising them while you've been off living your other life. I'm not letting you take them from me." She rolled her eyes, dismissive as ever. "We'll see what the court thinks." And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, fighting the urge to explode. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. A few days later, we had our first court hearing. My lawyer had filed for full custody, and we were ready to present the evidence of Emily's affairs, including her plans to flee the country with Alex and take the girls with her. I was anxious, sure, but I was prepared. I'd spent weeks gathering everything I needed to make my case. Emily showed up with her lawyer, looking smug as hell. Dressed to the nines, she strutted in like she was about to walk a red carpet. She was playing the part of the successful, perfect career woman. Alex wasn't with her, probably too smart to show his face in this mess. But I could feel his presence looming over the room like a shadow. The hearing was tense. Her lawyer went all in, painting her as the primary breadwinner, highlighting my lack of income and prospects. They tried to paint me as some washed-up loser who'd sacrificed his career to play house, someone who couldn't possibly provide a stable environment for the kids. But they didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that I was about to dismantle Emily's entire story, piece by piece. I had the truth on my side, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down around her. It took everything I had not to blow up right then and there, but I managed to keep it together. I let them talk, let them spin their web of lies, because I knew what was coming, and it wasn't going to be pretty for Emily. Then, my lawyer stood up. Calm, composed, he began to lay out everything. He started with Emily's affair with Alex, then Ryan, and then moved on to the others. He didn't hold back. He showed the court the explicit text messages, the photos, the receipts from hotels. He even highlighted her plans to run off to Europe with Alex, leaving me behind without a shred of remorse. But the real nail in her coffin came when Alex was called to the stand. The moment his name was announced, Emily's face drained of all color. She had no idea this was coming. Alex tried to keep his cool, but it was clear as day. He was rattled. Under questioning, he admitted everything. The affair had been going on for months, and worst of all, he confirmed that Emily had indeed talked about taking the kids and abandoning me in the dust. It was brutal. By the time my lawyer was done with Alex, Emily looked like she'd been hit by a truck. But we weren't done yet. Next up was Ryan. Same routine. He took the stand and confirmed every detail, painting an even clearer picture of Emily's deceit. When Ryan was done, Emily's case had fallen apart completely. The judge, who had been stone-faced throughout, was now clearly unimpressed with her perfect mother act. It was all crumbling, and there was no saving it. When the hearing wrapped up, Emily stormed out of the courtroom, her face twisted in anger and defeat. I walked out with my lawyer, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. This fight wasn't over, but we had won a massive victory that day. Emily knew it too. The irony was, she had brought all this on herself. Her lies, manipulation, and betrayal had finally caught up with her, and there was no escaping it. All I had to do now was finish what I started. As I stepped outside the courthouse, a sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was starting to reclaim my life, piece by piece. But I also knew this wasn't over. Not yet. There were still more battles ahead, and I was ready for them. The final court hearing was set a few weeks out, and in the meantime, the tension between Emily and me only grew worse. We were still living under the same roof, which made every day feel like a countdown to disaster. Each interaction was like waiting for a bomb to go off. I was counting the days until this nightmare would end, but I couldn't let my guard down. I could sense that Emily had something else up her sleeve. The night before the final hearing, Emily came into the living room while I was nursing a glass of whiskey, trying to decompress. She stood there for a moment, staring at me, and I could tell by the look on her face that she was working up to something. "David," she said softly, her voice different from the usual sharp edge. "Can we talk?" I glanced at her, my skepticism clear. "What's there to talk about, Emily? You made your choices." She sighed, sitting down across from me. For a moment, she stared at the floor, gathering her thoughts. Then, in a voice filled with frustration and exhaustion, she spoke again. "I don't want this to get uglier than it already is. We don't have to destroy each other in court tomorrow." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Now you want to talk about keeping things civil? After everything you've done? After trying to rip the girls away from me?" She winced at that, but I wasn't about to let her play the victim. "Look," she said, her voice tightening. "I know I screwed up. I know that. But we can still work something out for the kids' sake." And there it was, her last-ditch effort to make me back off. But I saw right through her. This wasn't about the kids. It was about her. She was desperate to save face, to claw back some control after realizing she had lost it all. "You don't care about working things out for the girls," I said coldly, staring straight into her eyes. "You're just trying to salvage what's left of your own mess. You're still thinking about yourself. You always have." Her silence was telling. She knew I had her pegged, and there was no coming back from this. Tomorrow, it would all be laid bare in court, and no amount of last-minute negotiations would change that. I leaned forward, setting my drink down on the table between us. "You're only saying this now because you know you're going to lose tomorrow. You felt the shift in that courtroom. Everyone saw through your act. You're scrambling to save whatever's left, but it's too late, Emily. This is the bed you made." Her eyes flashed with anger, and she shot to her feet, fists clenched tight at her sides. "You think you're some kind of saint, don't you? Like you've never made mistakes. Well, I wouldn't have done any of this if you hadn't checked out of our marriage years ago." There was again the same old deflection, trying to twist the blame and make me the bad guy. But I wasn't biting. "I didn't check out, Emily," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. "I was here every damn day, while you decided to chase whatever you thought was missing. You're the one who chose other men over your family. You thought you could juggle it all, your career, your affairs, and your family like they were just boxes to tick. But life doesn't work that way." She stood there, breathing heavily, her face red with frustration, like she was on the verge of screaming. But instead, she turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I just sat there, staring at that door for a long moment, feeling a strange sense of finality settle over me. It was done, one way or another. The next morning, we were back in court. I sat calmly, composed, while Emily's lawyer made one last desperate attempt to salvage her case. But even as he spoke, it was obvious the judge wasn't buying a word of it. Then my lawyer stood up and delivered the final blow. He presented the last pieces of evidence. More texts, more proof of Emily's affairs, and even a video recording where she casually discussed fleeing the country with the kids. The judge's face remained neutral, but when he finally spoke, I could hear it in his tone. We had won. After reviewing the evidence, the judge said, his voice even, "It is clear that Mrs. Carter has not acted in the best interest of the children. Her extramarital affairs and her intent to relocate the children without Mr. Carter's consent are extremely concerning. Therefore, I am granting full custody of the children to Mr. Carter, with supervised visitation rights for Mrs. Carter. Additionally, Mr. Carter will retain ownership of the family home, and the division of assets will reflect Mrs. Carter's minimal contribution to the household." I didn't hear much after that. My mind was racing, but all I could focus on was one thing. I had won. I had fought for my daughters, for my future, and I had come out on top. Emily just sat there, staring blankly at the judge like she couldn't process what had happened. But it was real. It was over. As we left the courtroom, she didn't say a word to me. She walked out with her lawyer, her head held high, but I could tell she was shattered. Everything she'd schemed to take was slipping through her fingers, and there was no one to blame but herself. Back at the house, I began packing up her things. It felt surreal, like the final chapter of a long, drawn-out war was closing. The girls were staying with my parents for the week, so I had the place to myself. As I packed away her clothes, her makeup, her jewelry, I felt a rush of mixed emotions. Anger, sadness, relief. They all swirled together in a strange, overwhelming way. But above all, I felt free. Later that night, I sat on the porch, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the stars. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The lies, the betrayal, the months I spent pretending everything was fine while I planned my revenge. It had been a long, brutal road, but in the end, I had emerged stronger. I fought for my daughters, and I had won. As for Emily, I didn't know what her future looked like, and frankly, I didn't care. She'd have her supervised visits with the girls, and maybe, just maybe, one day she'd realize what she'd thrown away. But for me, this was the start of something new. A fresh beginning with my girls by my side. That was all that mattered now. This whole ordeal taught me something important. Revenge isn't about tearing someone down. It's about taking back what's rightfully yours, reclaiming your life and your dignity. I didn't just get even with Emily. I took back everything she tried to steal from me. My family, my pride, my future. And that's the best kind of revenge. Thanks for sticking with me through this, Reddit. It's been one hell of a ride, but I'm finally ready to close this chapter and start something new.